It's my very great pleasure to welcome everyone to this City Futures Research Seminar today. And my name is Susan Thompson, and I'm an Associate Director of the City Futures Research Centre, and I lead the Healthy Built Environments program. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where UNSW Sydney is located. And today, here in the lab, we are on the Kensington campus, which is located on the lands of the Bejical people. And please feel free to hop in the chat which lands you are on today. The First Nations people are a living part of the oldest continuous existing culture on Earth. I acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past and present, and their communities who have been stewards of the natural environment upon which all life depends. Today, we're going to be showcasing and celebrating work from our wonderful postgraduate students. And this is now a regular initiative for the City Futures Research Centre postgraduate students as part of our support and nurturing of them through their journey undertaking their postgraduate degrees. And today, I'm very excited and delighted to introduce Dr. Fatima Anipur, who's going to host the rest of our seminar. And Fatima is a lecturer in the City Futures Research Centre, and she also lectures in the Landscape Architecture program in the School of the Built Environment. Her background is in architecture and environment behaviour research, with a particular focus on inclusive design for children, people with diverse abilities, and senior citizens. And I think it's particularly special that Fatima takes carriage of the seminar from now in one moment, because she undertook her PhD here in the then Faculty of the Built Environment, and she's well placed to understand the challenges and the opportunities that our postgraduate students face. So I'll hand over to Fatima right now to host us through the seminar. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Today we have two HDR students presenting their research. First of our presenters is Parian Hoseini, who is a PhD candidate who joined us back in 2022. She's studying housing market impacts of increasing university student housing and Airbnb presence in Sydney. She holds a bachelor's degree in urban planning and a master's degree in urban design. Before starting her PhD at UNSW, Parian spent over 3 years in urban planning and design industry back in Iran. Thank you, Parian.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm almost at the beginning of my third year candidacy, and I'm going to present part of the field work I did alongside with the some theoretical background through literature review I did. So last year I spent most of my time doing the literature review because my research incorporates two phenomena of Airbnbization and studentification. So there are two different phenomena, and I needed to ground them theoretically to inform my research questions and methodology. So I'm going to very briefly present my theoretical background, then I'm going to explain a bit my research questions and methodologies, and then I'm going to talk about the part of the fieldwork that I did on the geographies of Airbnb and student housing in Sydney at the end. So I'm going to start with the evolution of gentrification concept since mid-60s, when it was first emerged. In every decade, there is one element or a couple added to the gentrification discourse. And for example, it was started being funded privately mostly at the very early days, and then it was followed by a government sponsorship and integration into that. One of the very significant component that was added in 90s to the gentrification concept was globalization, that was followed by new economic restructuring of cities and incorporation of international landlords and capital markets and platform capitalization. So almost very recently, transnational gentrification is also introduced as a specially embedded a process of neighborhood change that is enabled by a specially embedded transnational gentry, that their locational mobility creates new possibilities for profitable housing reinvestments in geographically dispersed markets. And this definition tries to stress on the fact that the population mobility, if it wasn't for the increased population mobility, transnational gentrification wouldn't have occurred in certain localities like in Sydney. So, like the classic gentrification, there are four sets of motives are discussed as motives for transnational gentrification. The first one is rent gap, but the difference is that the rent gap here comes from transnational upper and middle class, not necessarily local people within the same cities. Second one is lifestyle. We're seeing migration like never before. People migrate because of better life. This could be international students like myself, digital nomads, or any migrants for any other source of reasons. Third one is policy, and governments are now incorporating gentrification as an urban renewal strategy. And the last one is tourism, and this is particularly important in this discourse because tourism accommodation has now expanded beyond purpose-built hotels, what we know as Airbnb right now. So with this very brief introduction, I'm going to discuss the housing market implications of studentification and Airbnbization, which are the focus of my study. The housing market impacts of increased student population originally comes from the inability of universities to accommodate students, and that directs a bulk of student housing demand into mainstream areas, mostly in the areas neighboring universities. So there are all sorts of assumptions made about their impact. First of all is that increased university students lead to rent inflations because it creates incentives for landlords to accommodate a couple of students into single-family dwellings and extract more rents. And this may lead to housing conversion from single-family household to multiple family households. And then finally, it may cause displacement of low-income groups, mostly families. So despite that, there are all sorts of information on studies and the geographical, maybe mostly urban geography aspect of studentification, and there are very few studies done on housing market implications, and the results are pretty varied. They say that studentification may lead to a significant increase in rents in the host neighborhoods. It may lead to minimal increase, or it may lead to decrease in rents. So although a neighborhood proximity to a university is statistically influential, it is not systematically so. So this means that we know there are going to be impacts, but we don't know what they might be. And also, studies have stressed that the existence of a purpose-built university accommodation, student accommodation, can facilitate students' population growth without spillover to surrounding neighborhoods, which means it can prevent the neighboring local market to be affected by this increase. Unlike studentification, housing market studies of increased Airbnb are like a lot worldwide. So study says that because Airbnb is more profitable for landlords than long-term rentals, it may lead to increase in rental rates because there is a positive, research has seen a positive correlation between Airbnb and increase in asking rents. And that means there might be a reduction in long-term housing stock that makes affordability much worse. And then it may also impact house prices because the increase in rental income capitalizes into the house price and increases the price to rent ratio. There is also a policy dimension to both of these phenomena. Again, Airbnb regulation has evolved and elaborated much more fast and more comprehensive than student housing, which are very, very few regulation schemes that could be relevant to student housing directly or indirectly. And so, based on this very brief and very fast literature review that I presented, I can say that we can conclude that studentification and Airbnbization might be linked to transnational gentrification. That means that the housing market implications of these phenomena could be something similar to gentrification, or could be studied within the same framework. And this is particularly important for Sydney because it's one of very not, let's say, exceptional cases where campus is located around tourist attractions in inner and eastern suburbs. So that we can assume that, and I'm going to show it to you later, that probably both of these phenomena are coexisting in certain areas of Sydney. So there is a geographical, a housing market, and a policy dimension to that. But I have 3 research questions addressing each of these aspects. So the first research question is what are the geographies of these phenomena? I'm using census data and Airbnb data to see where these 2 submarkets exist, mostly in the Sydney metro area. It will be followed by a housing market housing market analysis using also different sorts of metrics from different sources in postcode level area. And I'm going to do a policy review analysis. And again, from policy documents, and I will have some interviews with different groups of housing market experts, local councils, real estate agents, and academic experts. So I'm going to present what I did in the last 6 weeks or so. I'm going to start with university student snapshots. The first image is a snapshot of the national level number of students, and this is for New South Wales. So we can see this creates confusion for me when I did the analysis. So I'm saying it in advance that it doesn't surprise you. Since 2016 until 2020, we can see an increase, a consistent increase in total number of university students. And although in 2020 we had COVID and there was lockdowns and the there was all this sorts of like conversations about how university students have reduced. In fact, the total number was way higher than 2016 yet. And this has implications for my research because I'm analyzing census data for 2006, 11, 16, and 2021. So 2021 will be compared to 2016. And this is so from now on, by university students, I will mean students attending a tertiary institutions who are living in non-family households in a group household or alone in a private dwelling, which means that I'm not talking about students living in university halls or on campus or purpose-built students at this stage. So this graph, the line graph, shows the total number of university students in my study area, and the stacked bar, the blue one, is the lone household, students living alone in a dwelling, and the green one is the group household. And what is interesting here is that in 2016 there was an increase, like 56% increase of group student household. But in 2021, and the lone households were like stayed almost unchanged. But in 2021, there was a much increase in lone household, which might be because of like COVID and safety reasons. So then I use this the specification here to extract data from census, and I calculated this ratio of students renting private dwellings by the total private dwellings in each postcode. This map shows the student concentration, the ratio, in fact, for 2006. And you can see that the purple one, which is Ultimo Broadway area, having 10 to 20% concentration in 2006. In 2011, the geographies stay almost the same, but the concentration increases. And we have Kingsford added to the Ultimo Broadway and Chippendale postcode areas. Here in 2016, again, the geographies stay almost the same, but the concentrations increases. And the Ultimo Broadway postcodes reach something around 27%, which means that 27% of the dwellings were occupied by students. So, and we can see increase in all those areas, like in Kensington, Kingsford, and the Barangaroo and Glebe, Newtown areas as well. But in 2021, what I expected so far was that there was a reduction. We don't have 20 to 30% occupation by students, which we had in 2016. We don't have that, but students tend to be more geographically dispersed. There are more darker areas than ever before, but still the city area remains almost concentrated. So there's a question, is we don't have data for 2023. So is 2023 something similar to this, or this, but with more concentration? So I'm going to quickly jump into Airbnb snapshot. This is the data for AirDNA from AirDNA monthly file in my study area, which is this area. The peak in Airbnb was in 2019, and it start to almost reduce after 2020. And what we had last year is something more or less like 2017. And what I did there were point areas, it's a geolocated property information in that property data in that in the RDNA source, and I put them into, I joined them into the postcode areas, like to calculate the same ratio that I did for student housing. So I divided the total Airbnb numbers by property, by total dwelling numbers to have the same ratio that I have for student renters. So in 2019, we have Bondi as a hotspot for Airbnb. That about, I think, 8% of the total dwellings were listed as Airbnb. But because here 2019 shows a peak, I did a very crude calculation of how many dwellings would be in 2019 if we had the data. And I calculated this ratio for 2019 as well. So this shows that in addition to Bondi, we have Palm Beach up in north as, again, a hotspot for Airbnb. And there is increase in the city area, the Parian Grove, the rocks, and this line over here, the Airbnb started to concentrate over there, Coogee, Waverley, Redfern, Potts Point. But in 2021, all the colors are disappearing except for Bondi, still almost a hotspot here. But most of the other areas that used to be very concentrated with Airbnb are not that much anymore. And interestingly, even 2023 Airbnb data is not much different from 2021. So we still don't have that concentration that we had before. So I put those hotspot areas, both the higher ones are for our student ratios, and the below ones are the Airbnb ratio hotspot areas from 2016 to 2021, except we don't have 2019 data for students. And this is what I did so far. And probably my postcode area sits somewhere in this boundary. I'm going to choose 3 postcode areas. And let's review why this area is so important for my research. Firstly, because it's home to around 500,000 Sydney residents, which is 10% of the total population of the whole, not Greater Sydney area, Sydney slightly smaller than the Greater Sydney area, but still 10% of the whole study area. And it accommodates 37% of student renters compared to the whole bigger areas, and provides 14,500 homes for them. And most significantly of all is that 50% of Airbnb properties in 2021 were located in this small area. So, and this data is only for 2021. We didn't have the return on international students on Airbnb, so we need to see what to expect next. Thank you.
I'm writing questions in the chat and from the audience now. Yes.
Thank you so much, Parian. It was very interesting. And I was just wondering, and possibly, are still investigating this, so just take it more perhaps a comment, or just interested in the whole issue of lone student housing and whether the provision of accommodation by private accommodation providers like Igloo and student providers, is that contributing to that, do you think, to lone student housing going further out into the suburbs? And
What the data that I looked at was only students in private dwellings. Those purpose-built that you're mentioning, the igloo, they are considered non-private dwellings, so they were not even in my analysis so far. But
I suppose it's also interesting, perhaps culturally, perhaps students increasingly prefer to have, their own independent accommodation, and maybe, I don't know, I'm just surmising here, but just the availability of those sorts of options for them might be fueling that sort of opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Or desire.
Many students might prefer not to live. Sorry, Ali, I'm entering character. And prefer to live in a shared house, and if they could afford or they have access to something, they might.
It was 2021, right, that we saw that spread when we saw the rents all drop down. So maybe it was that, living on your own was affordable if you were still here. It was accessible for the first time when it hadn't been before.
Yeah, and you didn't have to commute to your classes.
Well, that's true, because you just had to be on Zoom.
I do think the purpose build that you mentioned, they do influence how students choose their accommodation, right? Because I did do a book chapter a few years ago based on the Huri project, and students do, and it was only international students, but they do think about how purpose build is quite expensive, even though it's supposed to be all inclusive, right? So that can be a push factor for them towards particular types of private rental rather than going into purpose build.
Yeah, exactly. Purpose builds are not very much affordable.
I have a question. So the spread that you showed, those really cool maps that you showed of all the different spreads, in the last one in 2021, you showed it was like a lot more dispersed, where students were living. I'm asking you to project here, but what do you think, based on, you're in this research right now, what do you think it's looking like now? Do you think it's more concentrated around, or do you think it's continuing to be dispersed based on how expensive things are?
Good question. I hadn't thought about that aspect of it, but is it possible that it's more, is it possible that it's still more dispersed because students need to commute, but it's so unaffordable living in, here or around University of Sydney. So my assumption is that it could be quite more dispersed than maybe 2016, but still these areas that the neighborhoods around universities probably should have seen much increase than even more than 2016. But I think that the areas that were unaffected by students before, now students have found those areas. It's like a gold mine. They'll live there.
I have a question myself. So, did you also have a look at the duration of students staying in Airbnb and creating that kind of spreads? Because, it's such data available. Because some Airbnb accommodations, often encourage extended stays. I was wondering if that kind of a spread would change, the colors and the type of spread would change if you look at the duration of students stay in Airbnb accommodation.
No. Students staying in Airbnb, no, we don't have that data actually. We don't have the data on who rents Airbnb. There are two.
So complicated. Thank you.
Just a quick one. I know that first year students, it's a bit of a shock moving into, going to uni and if you're moving from far. So is there any information about whether as the student becomes a second year student, a third year student, they move out away from the uni provided then, or if transportation to the place makes a difference, or is that not available? Is that something?
I know that I have seen in the literature that it's said that as student, first year students tend to be located around universities. much more. But when they become more experienced, more familiar with the city in their second and third year, they can find cheaper options in a bit better locations. Yes, that is mentioned, but I haven't seen any studies that like consider the transportation needs to the students' residents.
Yeah. Sorry, I have another question. I was wondering, so what was Richard's question right there just made me think of it. So you were saying that, yeah, students tend to move, they live close to areas and then they tend to move after their first year. Have you seen anything in the literature that talks about like how that maybe changes the landscape, like the culture of a space, right? Like people building community and like building relationships and culture in like say a suburb, based on how, I guess, because a year's not very long, that's quite transitional. Yeah, have you found that?
The studentification literature as a neighborhood change phenomenon, yes, it has a cultural aspect to it. But they say where students live, the neighborhoods that students tend to live, it becomes like a magnet that pulls more and more students into that because it has a student buzz, student vibe, something into that. Yes, there is a cultural component to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was fascinated with the literature examples you gave of studentification in Canada and a couple of other places. In Canadian case, it actually reduced housing prices, and in another one it didn't make any difference. And the third one, prices increased. I'm interested as to why that might be. That's a complicated question.
Yeah. I would not have the answer.
Maybe the Canadian one particularly is of interest, the depressed house prices.
The Canadian one, they saw increase in rents, significant increase in rents.
It's the increase. What was the decrease? The last one, was it?
The last one is the decrease in an Israeli context. Yeah, they argued that because of students coming in and they expect probably less of maintenance from the landlord. So it is possible that the housing quality decreases that much over time, over like 10-year period. But the homes are not very appealing, very not well maintained. So the demand reduces and they couldn't get the same rent as they could like 10 years before that. So I think the reason for that is this that was mentioned for this case.
Thank you, Parian. Let's move on to our next presenter. Ali Buxton is currently pursuing a Master of Philosophy, which is focusing on experiences of young single women in shared housing in Greater Sydney area. Ali also works in the operational capacity at City Futures Research Centre, and we're really fortunate to have her. And Ali has a Bachelor of Social Research and Policy and is passionate about her research and its impact on policy and community development, particularly at the intersection of gender. Welcome, Ali.
Okay. Cool. Okay, hello everybody. Before I get started, I'd first also like to acknowledge that I'm presenting on Bidjigal land and extend my respects to any Aboriginal persons here today. And I'd also just like to give a bit of a content warning. There are some things to be raised today that talk about sexual and domestic violence. If it makes you all uncomfortable, please feel free. So, my name is Alessandra or Ali Buxton. I am doing a Masters of Philosophy under the supervision of Professor Hazel Easthope and Dr. Hazel Blunden, and I am researching the experiences of young single women living in share housing in Greater Sydney. So the aims of this research, I'm aiming to understand why young single women are living in share housing, how they experience their share housing, and the impacts this may have on their future decision making. So this is
quite a lot. So today I'm just going to focus on a quick recap of share housing, an overview of gender and housing, and some early findings on the experiences. So the second aim, specifically looking at the advantages and the precarity in share housing, followed by what can we do to make share housing better. So the concept of share housing is not foreign to most people here, but as a benefit of reminder to most, to those who may have forgotten, share house is 2 or more unrelated occupants who cohabitate. So they usually, not always, have their own room, and they share communal spaces and household costs. And so the common portrayal of a share house in the mainstream media is that it's a super fun and chaotic period in a young person's life, a coming of age period. So, you live with your mates, you mess up, fight, you drink, you party, but it comes to an end when you're ready to grow up and move on. But this narrative is becoming less of a reality, especially with the current housing market in Greater Sydney. With first home ownership at an all-time low and rents drastically increasing, more young people and more people in general are turning to share housing as one of the more affordable and viable housing options. And so this kind of negates the idea that share housing is temporary. So why is it important to consider women's experiences of housing and precarity? So women statistically have lower incomes than men. This means they're less able to save for a deposit from a home. They usually can't afford the same rental properties. It takes them longer to save for a deposit, meaning they're less likely to own their home when they're retired. They're often paying their mortgage off at higher levels of stress than males. And also rates of homelessness amongst women are rising faster than men. So elderly women are the fastest growing homelessness population. And also there's been drastic increases seen in the population of the homeless population of women aged 35 to 44 and 12 to 18. On top of that, women are also disproportionately impacted by domestic violence. And this is also the leading cause of homelessness for women and children. And on top of that, affordability can be a barrier in leaving unsafe situations. So when housing choices are limited, they're limited when you have children and when you also have pets. And there can also be a barrier in finding affordable housing when, coming out of divorce or also leaving an unsafe situation as well. And so why is it important? Why am I researching young single women? So women are statistically underrepresented in research, and this is especially more so for women of diverse backgrounds or minority backgrounds. And that's not to say that there's no housing literature on women, there definitely is, but often this literature focuses on women's and their relationship to others rather than women in themselves. So as mothers, as partners, and as wives. And also there is a growing field of research on share housing, but this research doesn't specifically focus on young and single women. And so I'm hoping to fill this research. So this is a graph of the Greater Sydney group household population between 2006 and 2021. As you can see, there's pretty steady upward trend in the last few years. There's a bit of a plateau drop off between 2016 and 2021. There could be many reasons for this. One, young people are not moving out or they're moving back home, or people are not moving out and moving back home in general. And also as well, the 2021 census was taken in a hard lockdown. So what here is I have a linear interpolation model that is done based off previous stats. And so this shows what it may have looked like had COVID not intervened, but it's really hard to know exactly what this looks like at the moment. So there is some evidence that's coming out. So Flatmates Finders, which is a peer-to-peer share housing website, found that in 2000, they released stats in 2021 that showed the average person searching for a room versus rooms available was 3 to 1. And then so early last year, flatmates.com, which is another peer-to-peer share housing website, released figures that showed that in Greater Sydney, the person searching for a share house versus rooms available was 133 to 1. So there's been like this huge jump in the last few years. So there's never been, why, we don't know, but I guess there's never been a better time to find out. So for this research, my methods were 2. I did a questionnaire and interviews. There's 169 valid responses on the questionnaire, and I conducted 21 semi-structured interviews. Both of these were informed by a hermeneutic phenomenological approach. I don't have time to talk through that today, so if you wanted to find out later, I can talk to you about it later. But yeah, so and these have been thematically analysed. I've almost finished my thematic analysis of all the interviews as well. And so what makes share house precarious? Everything that makes renting precarious, but just that little bit more. So the average rental precarity, you've got lack of security or tenure, you've got rent rises, you've got poor quality of housing. And in a share house, you also have navigating complex relationships. So you've got less control of who's in your space, whether this is your housemates, visitors, partners. You've got a potential rotating door of tenants. And you also have complex rental arrangements and power dynamics, conflict, and interpersonal relationships to deal with as well. And so what are some early findings? So this is some demographics. So the age range of the participants in the questionnaire range between majority between 18 to 29. And in the interviews, tried to follow a similar-ish spread of who participated. Over 85% were employed. And of those employed, over 54% had a full-time job. And interestingly, there was an exact 50-50 split of those who were studying versus those who weren't studying. So the length of time living in a share house, close to 40% had lived in their share house for 2 to 5 years. About 37% had lived in their share house for 2 years or less, and 23% had lived in their share house for more than 5 years. And the share house size is pretty even between 2 to 4. So most lived in either a 2 to 4 person share house, with a smaller percentage living in a share house with 5 or more occupants. And so why are women living in share housing? So there was a multiple choice question in the questionnaire, and the most voted on response was share housing is the most affordable option to me. So about 80%, so 8 and 10, said that share housing was their most affordable housing option, and that's why they were there. So we asked, then they were asked how affordable is share housing for women. So they were asked what weekly income they spent on rent. And so this question found that 60%, so 6 and 10, were spending more than 30% of their weekly income on their rent. And as well, they've just said it was the most affordable, and also over 50% had a full-time job. So just calculate on that. And so what makes a share housing enjoyable? So when asked, and when we asked women what they enjoyed about their share house, young women what they enjoyed about it, they said it's fun. They love to live with friends. It was a place to make connections, to learn to live communally. It's a place to create a home. And it's also a cheaper option to live closer to work, study, and amenity like bars and restaurants and things like that. So friendship and connection was a really important focus point when asked what's most enjoyable about share housing. So young women talked about how their housemates functioned as a family, like a non-traditional family or a chosen family, that they loved living with others for companionship. So they didn't want to live alone because it was lonely, and especially coming out of the lockdowns, that was really important. It was a place to create rituals, eating dinner together, having movie nights, games nights, and things like that. And also being friends inside and outside of the household was also important. So this quote is from Dana, not her real name. She says, "We'll go for little outings together, share a glass of wine or a gin and tonic. Like if she's cooking dinner, she'll 100% offer to cook dinner for me and vice versa." And so participants were asked in the questionnaire to write about what they felt was invaluable about feeling at home. And 1 in 3 indicated that friendship was a really important factor in their positive share house experience. So when asked about sense of home, almost 80% said that they felt at home in their share house. And then if I refer to the interviews here, so there's 2 separate interviews here. We have one from Cece. So she said that she felt at home because she contributed to decorating communal spaces, putting things on the wall, contributing to furniture, taking up space as she worded it. And then we have a second quote here from Bella. Bella said, I came home from traveling. It was, and I had this huge wave of feeling I was at home in my bedroom and in my bed, sitting and feeling at home on pieces of furniture that I had contributed. And so what's been an interesting thing that's been coming out of especially the interviews is that there's this controlled sense of home in the bedroom. So the bedroom in a share house is usually the one place that you have complete domain over, unless you're in a shared room, which there's fantastic research done on that by Sarah Nazarian and Kristen Rowling, if you wanted to read that. That's not what I'm studying about today. So yeah, but there's this inflated sense because it's a multi-purpose space. So you go in there to study, sometimes you eat in there, you hang out in there. So there's this, sense of scaled down sense of home as well in the bedroom too. And also the share house was seen as a positive place for learning experiences. Women talked about how they learnt to navigate conflict, but outside of those, traditional family places. It's a great place, you grow as an adult, you meet new people, you can create, your own chosen family, and you also learn to manage household roles. So this quote again is from Dana. So Dana says, I would say living in share housing has been mostly positive because of the friendships that I've been able to form along the way. I know not everyone's had that experience, but I've been fortunate to have lived with people who have been a pretty informative part of my 20s. So what makes a share housing precarious? So this quote here is from Ellen. Ellen says, you take a huge risk with living with strangers. Really, you're just taking a punt is how it's going to happen. So it's like the most unsafe thing you can do living with a stranger. You have no idea if they're weird or what they're going to do. And so what this quote highlights is just there's a certain amount of risk that you take entering a share house, especially with strangers. You've got no idea the circumstances you may end up in, whether they'll be good or bad. And as Ellen said here, you're just taking a punt as to how it's going to happen. And so a big part of the share house is communal areas, So, the kitchen, the backyard living area, and the bathrooms. So typically you pay for your room, that's yours, and you also pay to use the communal spaces. And as you can see from questionnaire responses here, most young women felt that their communal spaces were shared pretty equally. But there is about 16% who sit at unequal. So in the last decade, there's been a concentrated effort in both social and political spheres to kind of radicalise this idea of space. And so looking at this from a feminist lens, there's been much discourse on how women navigate space. So specifically looking at, how they've been socialised. So you've got books like The Feminist City, Space, Place and Gender and Taking Up Space, which touch on how patriarchy has shaped our social and physical structures, meaning that masculinity is built into the fabric of our work and urban spaces. So but what about in the home? So some feminists argue that home is one of the few places where women can occupy more space. But often this is referring to domestic and family relationships and family households. So what happens when you take the concept of gender and you put it in a share house? So this quote is from the questionnaire. And this young woman has said, I'm too conscious of how I occupy spaces, too much, too little, and how I present myself. I think this would differ in share houses with all or mostly women, however. So there's this term in feminist theory of the shrinking woman. And the concept of the shrinking woman symbolises societal pressures on women to conform physically and behaviourally and can lead to a sense of diminishing self-worth and power. So here we see that this participant is critical of how she occupies space, and she specifically refers to gender as being a part of that. So this next section here, I'm going to give you a bit of a life story of one of the participants. So this is about Hattie. So Hattie moved from a small town to study in Sydney. She moved with some friends from her hometown, and they've been living in and has been living in share housing for about 8 years. So since she was around 18, 19. And the share house group that she moved with, they stayed together through all different parts of Sydney. So this first quote here from Hattie is talking about, brings up familiar topics of rental insecurity. So not wanting to rock the boat. They kept asking for maintenance requests and they were getting pushback from the real estate agent and they felt very nervous about it. So something to also consider in discussions about rental security here is, unlike a family household or a couple household, is that when considering a share house, you're considering a group of unrelated adults. So if the share house is ending or the lease is ending or they're being evicted, you've got two options. The share house can all move together or they can disband and find a different place on their own. So it just adds an extra level of complication to consider when considering evictions. So this second quote is from a separate the same interview with Hattie, and she's talking about her first share house that she moved to when she moved to Sydney. So here, she said that their landlord would call and be abusing them over the phone and emails, and he would schedule inspections to the house and wouldn't tell them and would just show up while they're in their pajamas. So in this share house, this was 3 girls and they were 18, 19. And so their landlord, how he described him, was in his 50s and sometimes would also bring his son. And the way she described him in the interview was physically imposing. So there's a very obvious layer of power and gendered power here. You know, you have 3 19-year-old girls who are not in a position to say no. You know, you've already got the landlord-tenant dynamic. You add a 50-year-old man and 3 19-year-old girls in their pajamas. You have a very, very clear power dynamic there as well. So it's just something to consider in the landlord and real estate relationships as well. So navigating conflict. When asked about how they navigate if their share house has a lot of conflict, 1 in 4 said that they had conflict in their household. This is probably less than the classic, you know, mum, dad, and kids household, to be honest. So this quote here is from Mila. So Mila's share house disbanded, and she got a notification that her bond had been returned. So, but the way that bonds work with the New South Wales Rental Bonds Board is they usually come back to one person. And so she sent a message to her housemate asking, hey, where's my part of the bond? And her ex-housemate said, we don't think you cleaned enough, so we think you deserve your bond back. And so she had to, you know, she eventually did get it back. But what this goes to show is just how the current systems that exist, you know, such as bonds, don't account for the complexity of share housing. You know, you could have 4 or 5 people who contributed to a bond. And this can, you know, something like bonds can create conflict and power dynamics between tenants themselves. So safety was a theme that came through very strongly in both interviews and the questionnaire. And so got this first quote here. So this is from Valerie. Valerie says, the door didn't have a lock on it. And so when things got scary, I'd have to pile books under the doorknob just in case anything would happen, especially if I was there by myself. The second quote is from Molly. She said, I found out after moving in, my housemate was a drug dealer. The third quote is from Erin. Erin said, the guy I lived with sexually assaulted me, but it was also during COVID and there were no houses to move out to. So I had to live there for 8 more months before the housing market fixed itself and I could find somewhere else. And its fourth quote is from a questionnaire participant that says, I started living with people I didn't know prior to moving into share housing. This was unsafe with significant drug use and domestic violence between the head tenant and her on again, off again boyfriend. I ended up having to call the police and it was required to attend local court. I no longer feel like share housing is a safe environment. I'm constantly on edge about potentially dangerous housemates and whether people quietly would prefer if I didn't live there. It makes me feel like my home is not somewhere I can switch off. So you can see from these responses, it really differs in what made these young women, or in the case of Erin, a femme-presenting non-binary person, what made them feel unsafe. They, you know, we have kind of different levels of unsafety. You know, we have dangerous housemates, we have criminal activity, we have sexual violence, and we have domestic violence. And what these quotes don't cover is that in all instances, they were referring to men. Or in the interviews they were. They're all referring to men. So it's very obvious gendered safety concern that factors into share housing. So where does share housing factor in discussions about how we make renting better? So like standard renting, rental security is a core concern, especially regarding, you know, affordability, security of tenure, and the quality of housing. So share housing offers a great, viable, affordable, relatively affordable alternative for young women. It offers benefits to create a home, to cultivate friendship, and to learn and grow. However, it can also be really precarious. It can impact how women use their communal spaces. It can be complicated dealing with real estate and landlords. And there's also gendered and power factors to factor into landlord-tenant relationships. Power and conflict can be also difficult to navigate, and there are uniquely gendered safety concerns. So what can we do to make share housing better for young women? We can make renting more secure to start off, you know, ending background evictions, regulating rental increases, things like bond transfers and more affordable housing. So now Zhang and Gurren in their work in their 2021 paper talk about how there's two different types of people who live in share housing: the people who choose to, and the people who are only there because they can afford to. So we need targeted interventions that deal with different aspects of that as well, and one of those is affordable housing. And what else can we do? I think we need to really start considering share housing as a significant household option. It's no longer transitional. It's also no longer just for students. As you know, 50% of this cohort, a pretty small sample, were not students. And we also need to think of strategies to address the issues of safety and insecurity in housing. So thinking about, and broadening the ideas of domestic and sexual violence, that they don't just exist in family or intimate partner relationships as well. And overall, we'll just need to undertake more research into share housing so we can build off some fantastic but existing work. We've got Sophia Marlson, Nazreen Raming, Zoe Goodall, there's so much, Nicole Barron. And we need targeted interventions for the different aspects of share housing, as I said before. So those that are there by choice and those who are there because it's all they can afford. And I also will be writing my, my proposed interventions probably soon. So if anybody has recommendations, please let me know. But that is it from me. So thank you.
We only have a few minutes left, so we are full.
What proportion of your respondents were living in women-only?
Majority,
households?
yeah. So I didn't include that because probably would have been, I would have talked for 5 more minutes. But most, yeah. So over 50% were living with only women. So which was interesting. Yeah, whether that was a choice or just happened, I'm not entirely sure. Some indicated in the survey that they chose their share house because there was more women in it, but others had moved into, share housing with friends and stuff like that.
And is that compared to the population,
I don't know. It's a good question. It's hard to know exactly what, because share houses, they're so complicated because it's very difficult to understand. So, and also as well, a lot of the census data doesn't even include relationships in households. So according to the ADS, no relationship exists in a share house, which I know is not true. So yeah, there's also aspects of that. So it's a really informal spaces are really hard to find info on. Yeah.
Yeah, this is completely so I'm just thinking. So I was just reading about it in the morning. So there are two major disruptors for real estate, right? So one is Airbnb and one is WeWork. It's topical that we are discussing something similar. Being shared houses and things like that. So what the way WeWork disrupted commercial markets about taking a share is, will there be an opportunity for someone to recreate that for housing in terms of sharing housing in a much more? So imagine being there or something. So will that be?
Can you speak up? Sorry,
same way WeWork disrupted the commercial market.
Yeah.
Commercial things where they introduced sharing and made that more accessible, more easy, flexible for small businesses. Will there be something in? Is that possible, or like there are opportunities for in?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know, because it's share housing has always been there, and it always will be there. But what it looks like is, because at the moment I feel that it's a response to affordability. Is why I believe, and there's no statistical data to back me up on this, but I believe that the share housing population has climbed because we've all seen the demand at the moment. But how it will act as a disruptor, I'm not.
So that as a solution, it might solve most of the power imbalances because landlord is dealing with WeWork, right? Or imagine a tenants union is doing that, and you leave with a tenants union. So it balances it out. So landlords don't have the same one. Or say, you know what, you want renting from now on.
Yeah.
That kind of that could be one thing, but it also introduces other problems. But
absolutely. We can talk more because I do need solutions.
I'm conscious, Ali, that at times almost up. But I was also thinking in terms of recommendations, what about a guide for people about to go into share housing?
Yeah.
And to sort of
there is
talk about
there is the Redfern Legal Centre has like a share house guidebook, but it's complicated because each share house, it really depends. Like you could have a housemate who boils tuna, like, you know, what do you do in that situation? Versus a housemate who's, you know, could be potentially violent. So it
totally. But just, you know, perhaps some protocols around navigating issues.
Definitely.
Different attitudes to who's going to clean and how clean it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
All sorts of things. So I think there's
something there.
Look, I'm just going to say a big thank you to our wonderful speakers, inspiring work, really fantastic to hear you talking about your work in a public forum, and well done, and hopefully that's going to be something that you'll remember as part of your candidature, but also in the development of your research and your careers. So well done, and thank you so much for presenting to us. Also, thank you in regards to the seminar logistics, particularly Richard. Thanks so much, Richard. And the IT, which is super important. And also, Ali, thank you for all of your work always. And lastly, as chair of the postgraduate working group in the City Futures Research Centre, I'd just like to thank Charlie, Fatima and Ali, who are also on the committee, and we're certainly trying to implement different initiatives, and it's a work in progress. So any ideas from you, please let us know. And our next seminar next week is Professor Monica Watchowitz, and I'm sure I've pronounced that incorrectly. Apologies to Monica. But Monica's going to be talking about navigating the challenges and opportunities in geospatial data science, and she is from RMIT. So that's next week. And thank you all very much. And as I say, have an enjoyable evening.